Time once again for a little bit of kitchen table astronomy, but a lot of bit of global politics with Hampshire College astronomer and the head of Kainaat Studios, Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe. I'll start out by saying that I was having a great time at the Green River Festival watching Kathleen Edwards, who was, I think, one of my top acts of the whole time, when a push notification comes through from the New York Times on my phone, which I should shut off at all times, but certainly when I'm in a good mood situation like Green River Festival, that said the United States had bombed Iran. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, a quick bit of astronomy, the Vera Rubin telescope.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that we would be talking about this amazing telescope, Vera Rubin Observatory, and the telescope that has just released its images today. There was some preview of that. It's going to, again, and we use this word quite often, but this is true. It's going to revolutionize astronomy because it will be scanning the entire skies with the biggest camera that astronomers have ever built. It's going to be incredible, but you will have to wait another week because there is sort of bombing going on in other parts of the world, and so we are back in the Middle East, and so I wanted to start with that. And if I can tie it in with astronomy a little bit, it's not going to be light today, but we can make it as much as we can. When I was in graduate school, so I worked on how stars form in galaxies, and I was an observational astronomer. So we would use telescopes and use data, but then you had cosmologists, and cosmologists work with computer simulations oftentimes. I mean, cosmologists also do observations, but oftentimes they're also doing computer simulations of the whole universe. And you can imagine, and that was part of our joke as well, that their egos were bigger than the Milky Way, because they are playing God, in that sense, right? They're like, okay, hey, if I change this variable, how does the universe come out? And so there is a little lighthearted ribbing between observational astronomers and these people who do computer simulations for that. And so we used to joke about it, that cosmologists who study the whole universe and do simulations, that cosmologists are often in error, but never in doubt. And I bring it up because to me it seems like the U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Middle East, follows the same principle. Mm-hmm. U.S. foreign policy is often in error, but the administration is never in doubt. Mm-hmm. And right now, of course, some people are remembering the mission accomplished banner by President Bush, the second Bush, George W. Bush. And after the Iraq War had just started, and it was I think it was 2003 when the...
It was felt like days after that invasion started that they declared that the mission was accomplished.
And of course, there were many years later when the official withdrawal of the U.S. troops, most of it, they're still there, some of them in Iraq, took place, and it cost tens of thousands of lives and hundreds of thousands of people who are injured and affected for the rest of their lives. And same thing with Afghanistan. Afghanistan, again, much more closer to Pakistan in that
where
sense,
you're from originally.
Where I'm originally from. And after 2 decades or more, finally the U.S. withdrew from there. And the whole purpose was to remove the Taliban from power. And when they left, Taliban was in power. Mm. And now we are again in a step where President Trump just announced about the successful mission that just took place of the bombing of the nuclear sites in Iran, which is an act of war, which is also illegal. And saying that we are all done and Iran should come to a negotiating table. Now that we have bombed you, let's talk peace. And if that reminds you of sort of like those imperial powers in the back, like, hey, you people, we are trying to save you by bombing you. Now you should really listen to, I mean, why aren't you talking to peace? We have bombed you enough. And so we are back to that mode. And people like Thomas Friedman, I'm not even talking about the split in MAGA, or people like Ted Cruz or John Bolton, who had been wanting to bomb Iran for a long time, and it is happening. But New York columnist, for example, Thomas Friedman, who had said back in 2003 he was really rooting for invasion of Iraq. There were a lot of people rooting for the invasion of Iraq, and he had said that we'll be greeted as liberators. And that did not happen. And again, this is one of those astonishing things that in these type of things, you only fail upwards. So instead of taking blame for the hundreds of thousands of lives that got impacted, Thomas Friedman is still there. And he just wrote an article in which saying, oh, people who are saying that regime change, they're reminded of 2003 or Iraq. Oh, it's completely different. That didn't happen because it was the fault of Iran, which is a weirdly bizarre reinterpretation of history. Nevertheless, we are again talking about regime change. And my wife reminded me, like, that we used to have those tote bags, like, regime change starts at home. That was back in protest to the Iraq war, that we have to dust those off again. But unfortunately, yeah, we'll be fighting the same things. And it is not about today. So this is, in astronomy, we often talk about looking back in time. That we can actually, because of the finite speed of light, you are looking farther and farther back in time, the farther you look. Well, here is looking future in time. That when Newsweek or Time, if they survive, will put on the cover story, why do they hate us? Which they did back in the early 2000s. And they mean, of course, the Middle East or the Muslim world, or various ways, various interpretations of that. Here is a little guide to it, crib sheet, because they get bombed, and quite often and illegally, and there is no recourse in terms of the international reaction to it. I mean, there is, but from the global superpower, they're being bombed by that. So would there be a little bit of a sentiment like, that no, we don't want to be liberated by being bombed? Maybe. And so I think 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, we don't know how long this is going to continue. It's likely, people remember from Iran, the US was the one which overthrew a democratically elected government in the 1950s. And then when the Shah of Iran, who was not exactly the most congenial of leaders, let's put it this way, when he was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution, US was the one that was backing Shah. And again, all of that is not to say that Iranian administration or Iranian rulers are great. No. But the question is, what is our part? What is our government doing? And right now, our government has bombed another country in the Middle East after bombing Iraq, after bombing Afghanistan. Now, and Somalia, of course, we randomly bomb Somalia.
Involved in Yemen as well.
Involved in Yemen as well. And Yemen, in fact, there has been recent bombings in Yemen. And so now we are talking about Iran, a country of 90 million people. If you have seen the clip between Ted Cruz and
Tucker Carlson, who's now a hard-hitting journalist for people that would have been friends on his Fox show.
So this is where we are. Not a happy situation, a terrible situation, and the world is not safe. This is the ground rules that we are putting in place of how to react. But I think the second part I want to talk about is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, for which part of the justification that has been given in terms of that Iran is violation of and so on and so forth, it is seen as hypocritical from perspective of outside of the US. And again, we only live, and by we I mean within the US context in particular, in a bubble in the US, and don't see how other countries and other people see the US. And Non-Proliferation Treaty was inaugurated or started in 1968. And the point was, the worry was that at the time, that the world should not have many, many nuclear weapons because of our mutual annihilation. And we have enough weapons. Right now also we have enough weapons that we can all destroy ourselves. And so the question was, okay, so can there be a way to motivate countries to not pursue the weapons program? And there are certain countries, so at that time, the US, the Soviet Union at that time, and then France, England, and China had nuclear weapons. And it's like, okay, so these countries have that, but how do we deter many more countries to have nuclear weapons? Because then the likelihood of a nuclear conflict becomes higher. And so for that reason, there was this NPT. And today, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is signed by over 190 countries. But there are multiple three parts to that treaty. One is that countries should not pursue nuclear weapons, and I think that's one part of it. And countries who have signed it said, yeah, we are not doing that. But there are other two parts. The second part, which is equally crucial, is that the countries that do have nuclear weapons are going to dismantle or disarm their nuclear arsenal as well. Now, that is part of the thing. Okay, we are not going to pursue, but the countries that do have them are actually, in an ideal circumstance, again, this is where the vagueness comes in, they should actually completely disarm, but certainly reduce it substantially. Mm-hmm. And the third part was that to reward not pursuing a nuclear weapons program, the countries are going to be allowed to use nuclear science for peaceful purposes. So enrichment in that sense was allowed. And also the nuclear armed countries are going to help them with that technology. So as you can see, there are actually three parts to that. And you go like, okay, so somebody can violate, and Iran has been accused of violating this NPT, which they did sign. Okay, but guess what? There are some countries that did not sign. So the countries that did not sign include Israel, India, Pakistan, and they actually ended up building nuclear weapons. Pakistan and India have tested weapons as well, and Israel is unacknowledged. Pakistan has, the estimate is over 150, close to 160. India has also in the same ballpark range nuclear weapons. Israel is estimated to have around 90 or so nuclear weapons. And North Korea withdrew from it, and it also have a nuclear weapon now. So the lesson, by the way, an interesting part when I was looking into that, South Sudan is one country that is not a signatory to the NPT. I don't know what to do with that information, but that is in there. But the point is that the lesson from what is happening right now would be that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, then there is a big likelihood that you are going to get invaded and bombed.
Well, we saw this with Ukraine, who voluntarily withdrew, disarmed their nuclear armament with the idea that they would be protected if they were invaded. Then they were invaded, and they have been somewhat protected, but as everybody knows, are still engaged in a war that has dragged on for years and years and years. And maybe, I'm not saying I'm pro-nuclear weapon, it would have been more of a deterrent had they not got rid of their nuclear arsenal. However, they were doing, I think, what they felt was the right thing in regards to the global community of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons.
And you can also think about that with Iraq and Libya. And they were sort of like, so the list actually, the lessons to learn from it. From a rational perspective, from a nation's perspective, the only lesson I think you can learn from that is that if you don't have a deterrence, you are going to get pummeled by conventional weapons because there is a power imbalance in there. But if you do, for example, North Korea decided to pull out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then it went ahead and actually tested the bomb. It was okay. And even to another example, more recent one, because we talked about it last month, in fact, the tensions between Pakistan and India. And I'm using tension more as sort of like, a euphemism. There was actually a war, 5-day war, in some sense, where both India and Pakistan lobbed missiles at each other, had air battles. And there is thought, and I should frame it with a context that I've been against nuclear weapons from sort of like, from as far as I remember, because of Carl Sagan, because he always talked about, like, who speaks for Earth. Nuclear annihilation is our biggest threat. He talked about that this is our technological adolescence, that we have to get by it, because as soon as we develop the technology to communicate with other civilizations, we also built the technology to annihilate ourselves. And so for him, that was one of the reasons he was so anti-nuclear. And for me, growing up on Cosmos, to me, that was the most natural thing. And so when India tested the bomb again in 1998 and Pakistan responded, I thought that was a crazy thing, because they are so close to each other. Mutual destruction in that context is actually even more assured than with the Soviet Union and the United States. But the way the world is shaping up, with a lot of dictatorial democrats, you can think about it that way. I mean, Modi, for example, in India is very belligerent towards Pakistan, and of course President Trump. And in that sense, what happened between Pakistan and India, it looked like if Pakistan did not have a deterrent last May, I think it would have led to an open war, which Pakistan, being a much smaller country and less technologically advanced compared to India, they would have been pummeled, right? But there was a deterrence because of the nuclear weapons, and of course being close to China as well for Pakistan. So the lesson, I mean, in that sense, to me, it's a little bit that to be a fairer world, and I have to be very careful in the way I'm framing it, to be a fairer world, NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, doesn't guarantee you that. In fact, to be not bullied by other countries that have nuclear weapons and have conventional weapon superiority, in some sense, a fairer world requires you to have deterrence. And I think that's the lesson which anybody would take from what has happened, for example, in Iran recently. And this was the case, this has been the case before as well. Now the likelihood that what Iran is going to come to peace and say, oh, we are giving up nuclear weapons, or are they going to accelerate their efforts to really build the bomb, I think the bet would be on the latter.
So the Trump administration has claimed success on this bunker-busting bomb for the nuclear weapons program in Iran with the dropping of the bombs over the weekend. There are lots of experts that are saying that they believe that the uranium is mobile in Iran, that they probably have not actually eradicated the program. The Trump administration seems to believe that the bombing will bring Iran to the table for some sort of peace accord more quickly. You cannot, in my opinion, bomb your way towards peace. There was a treaty going. There was the peaceful use of nuclear enrichment for power in Iran under the Obama administration that the Trump administration has pulled out. Israel has now escalated the problem. Israel and Iran lobbing bombs at each other back and forth right now. The one thing that it seemed like happened over the weekend is Marco Rubio and others on the Sunday talk shows, which I didn't see as much of as I might have if Green River Festival wasn't happening, backed away from the regime change rhetoric a little bit, which perhaps is a positive sign, at least in the sense that this may not continue to the point where the entire regime in Iran would have to be turned over. Or do you think that that is Pollyannish of me to think that perhaps the U.S. involvement in this could actually be done?
I mean, what does it mean? Whether they say regime change or not, they have just bombed over there. And the bombing has taken place when negotiations were taking place. I mean, this was, Trump himself said, I'm going to give it 2 weeks. There was conversation going on, and the 2 days later, he bombed. It's also, from the New York Times, it appears that Trump may have led them to believe that there is real negotiations going on when Israel's surprise attack happened. So that is also part of the thing. And the attack happened with tacit approval, or at least information to the U.S. So the U.S. knew about the attack happening while they are negotiating the conversation about what to do about the nuclear weapons and what to do about the peace treaty. And when in the first Trump administration, when the U.S. pulled out of this multinational treaty, everybody said that Iran was complying with that. So it is weird, and this is one of those sort of like jujitsu moves, that people still think that Iran is the bad guy. Iran is the one who's violating all of these things, whereas it is us who keep on doing things that are in violation of international order, international treaties, and these multinational treaties with Iran.
As well as our own laws in some circumstances. Democratic lawmakers and even some Republican lawmakers are saying, we have bombed another country. We have essentially declared war without declaring war. That is within the power that the Congress should hold, and we need to bring that power back from the executive branch.
And if I can just tie in, because I want to talk about one other thing regarding that, but if I want to just tie into that, and regarding the NPT as well, you and I actually a few months ago talked about that the U.S. is planning on spending $1.7 trillion on modernizing U.S. nuclear weapons program in over 30 years. And we talked about it. I mean, that turns out to about like $57 billion per year, or more starkly put, $108,000 per minute for 30 years. That is what the US is planning on doing with its nuclear arsenal. So to come out and say, you cannot have the nuclear bomb because of the NPT, but remember that one of the key components of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was that the countries that do have that are going to reduce and disarm. And here the US is planning on spending $1.7 trillion or $108,000 per minute. So when we talk about, we don't have money for schools, Amherst, Northampton, there are a bunch of schools that are actually struggling with that. I mean, I looked at it that Amherst School was in a $2 million shortfall, and you can actually get some of that, with 10 to 20 minutes of the spending on this nuclear arsenal, right? Mm-hmm. That's all, because you are spending $100,000 roughly per minute on modernizing nuclear weapons. So it is pretty clear that the countries that have nuclear weapons, and right now the estimate is that there are about 12,000 nuclear weapons in the world. US has around 4,000, Russia has about 4,500, and of course I've mentioned other. China has 400, Pakistan 170, India 160, and Israel expected to have sort of around 90 or so. So there are a lot of nuclear weapons in there. The countries that don't have it can get bombed. And I want to connect that to the normalization. So right now with Israel and Iran, they are lobbing missiles at each other, mostly from Israel to Iran. And same kind of thing happened with Pakistan and India as well. So there is a little bit of a new normal where you can actually just attack other countries without, in some sense, I guess, declaring war, although that is war, but it normalizes that. So Tehran, a major city, is being attacked in various places, but so is the normalization of the killing of scientists. And this is the last thing I want to talk about, that it's always a little tricky that if you go to a Wikipedia site and there is an entry on assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists. Mm-hmm. So 17 of them, that's the counted number on the Wikipedia page. So so I looked at other things too, but 17 have been killed. Some of them actually just in the last couple of days, in the last week or so, in the bombings. But this has been going on since 2007. And Israel itself has commented. Sometimes it has commented, but mostly it has not commented itself. But U.S. has commented on that, and oftentimes it said, well, yes, Israel is behind it, Mossad is behind it. And that's what other people also think. But you also have U.S. senators. So, for example, after the killing of a couple of scientists, I think 2 years ago, Lindsey Graham, actually, he was in Jerusalem, and he said, well, yeah, I expect a few more accidents happening to those scientists. Mm-hmm. And others have also commented on these things. So you are also, in some sense, normalizing that it is okay to kill scientists. Now, somebody might say, well, and this was an actual debate as well, the German scientist Heisenberg, famous physicist, he was the brainchild. Could he have made the weapon, and would it have been okay to assassinate him or kill him? There was a debate regarding that. But ultimately, he was not killed, and there's a big question about it and your intentions and so on and so forth, because as a scientist, you are doing different things. Here, the question is like, who gives the authority to give a death sentence to a scientist and what they are working on? So I can go through the names of many different ones that have been killed. Some of them have been poisoned. Some of them, bombs strapped to their cars, and one of them was actually with a sort of like a machine gun, sort of like automated machine gun, and so on and so forth. It is a success story for Israel. But if by success you mean sort of like killing of people, yes. But if you mean success in terms of setting a precedent of extrajudicial killings just because somebody works in the nuclear program and hence they are guilty by association, then I would say consider that a dramatic failure to that. And this is another of those things which we are normalizing. And so I wanted to just give one example of the type of people. So if you think about a nuclear program, think about the US. How many scientists would be involved in this and how many things they would be doing it? And you would find sort of like, that there are all levels of people, all kinds of scientists that are involved in there. If you say that anybody who works in there is also a target, I think you will have a little bit of a problem. And this is where the empathy part comes in, that one way to think about what is going on over there is to look at it in reverse. Think about if Iran starts assassinating scientists, anybody which has any connection to, for example, the various nuclear labs that are here in the US. Would the US say, they are legitimate targets? Or are we going to give up and say, wait a minute, that's an act of war? I mean, that they are coming in, and dare I say, we may even use the word terrorism, because that kind of assassination, that kind of extrajudicial killing would potentially fall under that. But we don't hear that when it happens in Iran, because somehow we have managed to build a narrative that Iran is guilty to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so if something happens, that's okay. So I just want to give you a story, because we don't hear about these individual scientists in Iran because we don't care about their stories. And so one of them was assassinated. He was a PhD candidate. He was not even a sort of like, high-rung scientist. He was a PhD candidate in electrical engineering. He was killed on July 23rd, 2011. And his name was Daryush Rezanijad. And he was killed when he picked up his 5-year-old daughter and from a kindergarten. And he was with his wife. And on a motorbike, there were 2 people that came in and shot him. They shot 5 bullets at him. His wife got injured as well, and he died over there. Now, I just want to give you, there are others, 45-year-old, 50-year-old, and there is another 32-year-old that was killed. So a list goes on, right? I just want to give you this one example because this is one of the few ones where his wife actually ended up giving an interview to Western audiences as well. She actually, Shohreh Pirani, she actually got her PhD in political science. She actually became a professor after that. And she talked about that a year after, her daughter, whose name who's Armita. And again, I want to put a human picture to it. This is not just random data that has been happening. So her daughter, Armita, was still drawing pictures of that day, and she said that she still draws, this is a quote, draws pictures of her father. In them, she and her mother always have their mouths open in terrified screams. And you go like, oh wow, after a year. Yeah, she drew that picture every day, at least for a year. And what was his crime? Because he was associated with the nuclear program. He was a PhD candidate, and he was 35-year-old. Death sentence was given of where he was working. And so I think when there are a lot of different rules that are being shattered right now, international rules, including what's happening in Gaza, including what's happening in between Pakistan and India also going through, and also in Iran, I don't know how to end on a positive note. That is one of the reasons why I didn't want to talk about Vera Rubin Observatory, because astronomy gives you this big cosmic perspective, but this requires more than that.
Well, I will try to end it on a positive note. If you believe that nuclear weapons should be banned outright, and or at least regulated in a way that alludes to what the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Ban was trying to do. There is a local connection. There's at least three. Two organizations based in Northampton, Massachusetts, have members who are associated with these international treaties, which the United States has never signed up for. But Timon Wallace and Vicki Elson are part of an organization that you can learn more about at nuclearban.us, and they go around the globe trying to work with international governments to talk about the dangers of nuclear weapons. And I'll also add Dr. Ira Helfand, who is a physician in Northampton, is also both of these organizations are Nobel Peace Prize winning organizations. Dr. Ira Helfand, physicians for the anti-proliferation of nuclear weapons, working hard to try to show how dangerous nuclear weapons are for human beings as from a perspective of a physician. So these are organizations and people who live in your neighborhoods who are working hard to do this thing that is on a grand scale globally that can help us hopefully focus more on a cosmic scale more usually.
And raise your voice against war in the in the U.S. Raise your voice in the U.S. against U.S. involvement in foreign wars. I think that is crucial.